Okay, you are probably studying for the Manipulate an Equation quiz, and you're looking at, I hope you have grabbed yourself a copy of file number 7, because that's the worksheet where these problems come from. So what I want to do is I want to work through 6 problems, and as I work through them, you can work through them on your copy, or you can just watch, or whatever works for you. So here we go. This first problem says, get the p alone, so we're isolating the p, and make sure that it isn't negative. So to start off with, I'm going to write this over here in this space. So it says x equals y minus p over q. I've got parentheses around it here, although since this is the only thing on the top of the fraction, I didn't really need these parentheses anyway, so I'm going to get rid of them. With all 3 of these, numbers 1, 2, and 3, I'm going to probably use this same trick. I see that this right side is a fraction, so I'm going to turn the left side into a fraction, and I'm going to cross multiply. Hopefully you'll see why in a minute. So x times q, that's qx. I'm only writing qx because q comes first in the alphabet. I mean, really, you could write xq if you wanted to. And then 1 times anything is anything. So qx equals y minus p. So what this cross multiplying thing did for me was it got everything on one line, which is kind of the way I like it. So I want to get rid of this y, and this y and this p, it says the p is subtracted from the y. So that means y is just this positive number sitting here. So how do I get rid of it? I subtract y from this side, and that makes it go away. But whatever you do to one side, you've got to do to both. So now I have qx minus y equals, and I have to bring this whole thing down, this is negative p. So I've got my p by itself, but I've got to be sure that it's not negative. So if you were to talk to a math teacher, they would say, well, you've got to multiply everything by -1. I'm not a math teacher, and what I'm going to do is this. I'm going to say, let's just switch all the signs. If I switch the sign on this side, that means I switch the signs on this side. So a totally acceptable answer is p equals negative qx plus y. Or another way you could write it, you could write the y first. So you could write y minus then the qx. I guess I like this way better, but both of those answers are technically correct. So there's one down. How about I do this second one and I talk a lot less, because it's going to look pretty similar. So here we go. Okay, so that was almost the same as the last one. I would argue that was a little bit faster. All I had to do to get the y by itself was to get rid of this subtracted p by adding a p, and there I'm done. Okay, so let's do this last one here. Going for the p alone again here and make sure it's not negative. A little different here is I put the 2 different variables on the bottom. I didn't do that for these other 2. So when we cross multiply, we got y equals, and then we've got x times q plus p. And I'm going to leave it just like this. I could multiply the x by the q and the p, but I don't think that helps me out right here. So if I want the p by itself, I need to get rid of this multiplied x. This x is multiplied by these parentheses here. So I'm going to divide by x. That's going to cross it out. So now I've got q plus p equals y over x. And I want the p by itself. So I've got this addition going on here, and q is just this positive number sitting here. So to get rid of my positive q, I'm going to subtract q. That gets rid of it here, and it shows up on this side. So p is going to equal y over x minus q. Or you could write p equals negative q plus y over x. I don't know if one way is better than another, but this way works for me. So let me jump up to the last three problems here. These quite similar, except I actually used numbers. So this time I'm going to take these numbers and stick them in for the variables. So x is 10, so I'm going to have 10 equals, y is 4, so 4 minus p, and that is over q, which is 8. So I could just multiply both sides by 8, but I'm pretty fond of telling the freshmen to do the cross-multiplying trick, so it's the same result. So 10 times 8 here is 80 equals 4 minus p times 1. That's just 4 minus p. How do you get rid of a positive 4? You subtract 4. Subtract 4 here. We get 76 equals, what do we have here? We've got negative p. We don't want negative p. We want positive p. So if I switch this sign, I switch that sign. Just one quick note here. If you want to make sure you're right, you can do a self-check by taking this value right here and putting it back in the equation. So we'd have 4 minus negative 76 divided by 8. So if you're subtracting a negative, that's adding. So 76 plus 4, that's 80. 80 divided by 8 is indeed 10. So we know that we're right. That's called a self-check. I'm not sure I'm going to do it on these other two here because I'm already over almost to 7 minutes and I don't want to drive you too crazy. So let's do the next one. X equals y over q plus p. We don't know q, and we know that p is 7. And I left these parentheses off here on mine because these guys are alone down here. Let's see here. I'm going to turn this into a fraction. 2 times 1, there's my 2. And then negative 5 times q plus 7. So I guess maybe I should have left my parentheses here because I wound up putting them back here. So now I'm going to divide by this negative 5, so that way it cancels out. But since I did it to one side, I'm going to do it to both. 2 divided by negative 5, that is negative 0.4 equals q plus 7. How do I get rid of that plus 7? I subtract 7 from each side. So negative 0.4 minus 7 is negative 7.4, and that's my answer for Q. Really quickly, let me go and do a self-check. I'll pause the video so it's not as long. Okay, so I just took my negative 7.4 and I stuck it in for Q, and that was right here, and that gives me 2 over negative 0.4, and that turns out to be negative 5, which does indeed equal negative 5, so we know we did this right. There's our self-check. And let's see if we can get the last one done here before we hit 10 minutes. So x equals y squared, that's new, over q plus p, so 2 plus 4. Well, that's kind of nice. 2 plus 4, that's just a number, that's 6. So if I turn this into a fraction, I've got cross multiplying, I've got y squared equals 6 times 40, that's 240. I'm almost done. How do you get rid of a squared? You need to know that the opposite of something squared is square rooting something. So if I want to get just y, I need to take the square root of y squared. That gives me y. But since I did it to one side, I've got to do it to both sides. So I need the square root of 240. So let me find my calculator here. Here, somewhere on here. Where is it? There it is. So I've got 240, and then I'll hit the square root button, and I get 15.49. Remember, Moodle likes 2 decimal places, so I'm going to say 15.49. And since I did it with the other ones, I might as well just throw this back in to my original and see if the self-check works. I'll be back in a second. Okay, so I just wrote it out right here in blue, so let me do this. I've got my 15.49 still on the screen, so I'm going to hit the squared button, and then I'm going to divide it by 2 plus 4, which is 6, and I should get 40. If I get 40, then I know I did it right. So there it is, just under 10 minutes.